The bodies were arranged too carefully to be the work of wolves. Isaac crouched beside the overturned merchant cart, studying the way the driver's corpse had been laid out on the forest floor, arms crossed over chest, face turned skyward as if in prayer. The horses were gone, their harness cut cleanly rather than torn. No scavengers had touched the dead man, though he'd been here at least 2 days. Even the carrion birds kept their distance, circling overhead but never landing. Isaac had seen this before, this unnatural reverence that predators showed toward the victims of the undead. He pressed 2 fingers against the dead man's neck, feeling for the telltale puncture wounds. They're hidden beneath the collar, 2 neat holes that had drained the body of its vitality. The skin around them had turned a peculiar shade of gray, like old parchment left too long in the rain. Isaac stood, brushing dirt from his leather breeches, and surveyed the clearing with practiced eyes. The trees here grew twisted and dark, their branches reaching toward each other like the fingers of drowning men. Moss hung heavy from their limbs, muffling sound. It was the kind of place where things went wrong quietly. He was still 3 miles from Greyholm, the city he'd been traveling toward for the past week. The letter that had summoned him had been brief, written in the desperate hand of someone unaccustomed to asking for help. "People are disappearing," it had read. "The magistrate says it's bandits, but we know better. Please come. We can pay." The letter had been signed by a woman named Martha Wicklow, proprietress of the Singing Crow Inn. Isaac had answered such letters before, though they rarely ended well. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the canopy, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Isaac touched the small wooden pendant that hung around his neck, a circle bisected by a vertical line, the symbol of Iran, the god who walked between life and death. He didn't pray aloud. His faith was a quiet thing, expressed through action rather than words. But he drew comfort from the familiar weight of the pendant, the way it reminded him that there was order even in darkness, balance even in horror. He turned his attention back to the cart. The merchant's goods had been left untouched: bolts of wool, sacks of grain, a locked strongbox that still contained coins. Whatever had killed this man hadn't been interested in robbery. Isaac opened his pack and withdrew a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his careful notes on the creatures he'd hunted over the years. He sketched the scene quickly: the position of the body, the angle of the bite marks, the distance from the road. Details mattered. Patterns emerged from details. A sound made him freeze. Footsteps, light and quick, approaching from the direction of Greyholm. Isaac slipped behind a broad oak, his hand moving to the short sword at his hip. The steps grew closer, and then a figure emerged into the clearing, a young woman in a gray traveling cloak, hood pulled low over her face. She stopped when she saw the body, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered. "Not another one." Isaac stepped from behind the tree, moving slowly so as not to startle her.
"You knew him?"
The woman spun toward him, eyes wide with fear that quickly shifted to wariness. She was perhaps 20, with sharp features and darker skin that spoke of southern heritage. Her cloak was well made but travel-stained, and she carried a small pack slung over one shoulder. "Thomas Brennan," she said, nodding toward the corpse. "He sold wool. Made this run every month for 10 years. She studied Isaac with intelligent brown eyes. "You're not from Greyholm." "No, I'm traveling there." "My name is Isaac." He didn't offer more. People tended to react poorly when they learned what he did for a living. "Elara," the woman replied. She moved closer to the body, kneeling as Isaac had done, but she was careful not to touch it. "This is the 3rd merchant lost on this road in 2 months. The magistrate says bandits, but bandits would have taken the coin." She gestured toward the strongbox. Isaac watched her carefully. She wasn't frightened in the way most people were around the dead. There was grief in her expression, but also calculation. "You don't believe it's bandits either." "I don't know what to believe." Elara stood, brushing leaves from her cloak. "But Greyholm isn't safe anymore. People lock their doors at night. The watch has doubled patrols, but it doesn't help. People still vanish." She paused, seeming to debate something internally. "Are you going into the city?" "I am." "Then walk with me. The road isn't safe for those traveling alone." She glanced at the body one more time, her expression hardening. "Whatever's doing this, it's getting bolder." They left the clearing together, following the rutted road as it wound through the forest. Elara set a brisk pace, and Isaac matched her stride. She didn't speak for the first mile, and Isaac respected her silence. He used the time to observe her, the way she constantly scanned the tree line, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the fact that she walked on the balls of her feet, ready to run. She was afraid, but she was also determined. That combination could make people either very brave or very foolish. "What brings you to Greyholm?" she asked finally. "Business." Isaac kept his tone neutral. Alara laughed, a sharp sound without much humor. "Everyone has business in Greyholm these days. Most of it involves leaving." She adjusted her pack. "I'm a scholar. Was studying at the university until..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Until it became clear that certain questions weren't welcome anymore." "What kind of questions?" "The kind about why people are dying." She shot him a sideways glance. "The kind about old stories and older creatures. The kind that make powerful people uncomfortable." Isaac felt a flicker of interest. "And what did your research tell you?" Alara was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "That sometimes the monsters in old stories aren't just stories. That this region has a history most people have forgotten or chosen to ignore. That 300 years ago, there was a purge, a hunting of anything deemed unnatural. And that the families who survived that purge are still here, still ruling, still hiding secrets." Before Isaac could respond, the forest opened up before them, and Greyholm came into view. The city sprawled across a low valley, encircled by walls of gray stone that had given it its name. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, and the sound of church bells drifted on the evening air. At the valley's highest point stood a manor house, its towers piercing the darkening sky. Even from this distance, Isaac could see the banners that flew from those towers, a silver stag on a field of blue. "That's Ravencrest Manor," Alara said, following his gaze. "Home of Lord Edmund Ravencrest and his family. They've ruled Greyholm for generations." Her voice carried an edge of bitterness. "And they don't like questions." Isaac studied the manor, noting its commanding position, the way it seemed to watch over the city like a predator surveying prey. He touched his pendant again, feeling its familiar weight. Somewhere in that city, something was killing. Something that left its victims arranged like offerings and frightened even the scavengers. Something connected to old families and older secrets. They descended toward the city gates as dusk settled over the valley. The guards at the gate, young men in ill-fitting armor, barely glanced at them before waving them through. Inside the walls, the streets were busy with evening commerce, but Isaac noticed the tension beneath the normalcy. People hurried rather than strolled. They glanced over their shoulders. They didn't linger in conversation. This was a city living in fear, even if it tried to pretend otherwise. "The Singing Crow is in the merchant quarter," Alara said, pointing down a narrow street. "That's where you'll want to stay. Martha Wicklow keeps the best rooms in the city." She paused, studying him with those sharp brown eyes. "What did you say your business was again?" "I didn't." Isaac met her gaze steadily. "But I think you already know." A slow smile spread across Alara's face, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "A hunter, I thought as much. You have the look that way of seeing everything, trusting nothing." She adjusted her pack again. "Good. Greyholm needs someone who sees clearly. Just be careful who you trust. The city has teeth, and they're sharper than you might think." She turned to leave, but Isaac called after her. "The research you mentioned. The old stories. I'd like to see them." Alara looked back over her shoulder. "Find me at the Silver Quill, 2 streets east of the main square. Tomorrow, afternoon. But come alone and don't mention my name to anyone." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with practiced ease. Isaac made his way to the Singing Crow, a 3-story building of timber and stone that leaned slightly to the left, as if tired from years of service. Inside, the common room was warm and crowded, filled with the smell of roasted meat and the sound of low conversation. A woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair looked up from behind the bar, and her eyes widened with recognition or hope. "You're him," she said, her voice barely audible over the din. "The one I wrote to," Isaac nodded. "I need a room." "And information." Martha Wicklow's hands trembled as she reached for a key. "3rd floor, overlooks the street. Quiet mostly." She lowered her voice further. "My son was one of the first. Disappeared 6 months ago. They found him 3 days later, drained white as chalk. The magistrate said wild dogs, but I saw the marks on his neck." "I know what I saw." Isaac took the key, his expression carefully neutral. "I'll need names. Everyone who's disappeared, everyone who's died. And I'll need to know about the Ravencrests." Martha's face went pale. "Be careful with that name. Lord Edmund has eyes everywhere. And his daughter? She stopped abruptly, glancing around the common room as if afraid of being overheard. His daughter? Isaac prompted gently. Lady Cassandra. Beautiful as morning, they say. But strange. Keeps to the manor, mostly. Hasn't been seen in daylight for months. Martha leaned closer, her breath smelling of herbs and worry. People say she's ill, some kind of wasting sickness. But the deaths started around the same time she took to her rooms. And the Lord has brought in specialists, physicians from the capital, healers from the coast. None of them stay long. None of them can help. Isaac filed this information away, already feeling the pieces of the puzzle beginning to take shape. A noblewoman who shunned daylight. A string of deaths marked by exsanguination. A family with secrets stretching back centuries. The pattern was becoming clear, even if the full picture remained obscured. He climbed the stairs to his room, the wooden steps creaking under his weight. The chamber was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the darkening streets. Isaac set down his pack and withdrew his tools: silver powder, blessed water, wooden stakes carved from ash, and the journal filled with his notes on the supernatural. Then he moved to the window and studied the city below. Greyholm was settling into night, but it was a restless settling. Torches burned at every corner, brighter and more numerous than necessary. The watch moved through the streets in groups of 3 or more, never alone. Windows were shuttered early, doors barred. This was a city that knew something stalked it, even if it couldn't name the threat. Isaac's gaze drifted to the manor on the hill. Lights burned in its windows, and he could just make out figures moving behind the glass. Somewhere in those ancient halls, a predator waited. But predators could be hunted. They could be stopped. Isaac had dedicated his life to maintaining the balance between the living and the dead, to ensuring that those who crossed that boundary paid the price. He touched his pendant one final time before turning away from the window. Tomorrow he would begin his investigation in earnest. He would talk to witnesses, examine evidence, and carefully begin to tighten the noose around his quarry. But tonight, he would watch and wait. Because in hunting the undead, patience was often the difference between success and becoming prey oneself. Outside, the church bells tolled the hour 9 deep sonorous notes that seemed to echo with warning. In the distance, a dog howled. And high above the city, in the tallest tower of Ravencrest Manor, a single light flickered and went dark. The hunt had begun. Morning came gray and cold to Greyholm, the sun struggling to penetrate the thick layer of clouds that hung over the city like a shroud. Isaac woke before dawn, as was his habit, and spent the early hours reviewing his notes and preparing his equipment. By the time the city stirred to life, he was already moving through its streets, observing, cataloging, gathering information with the methodical precision of a man who knew that overlooked details could prove fatal. His first stop was the city morgue, a low stone building behind the magistrate's office that smelled of lime and decay. The mortician was a thin man named Oswald, with trembling hands and the haunted eyes of someone who seen too much death too quickly. He led Isaac through the rows of shrouded bodies without speaking, his silence heavy with unspoken knowledge. 7 in the last month, Oswald finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. He pulled back a sheet to reveal a middle-aged woman, her skin bearing the same gray pallor Isaac had seen on the merchant's corpse. All the same, perfectly drained. No signs of struggle. It's as if they went willingly to their deaths. Isaac examined the puncture marks on the woman's neck, noting their precise placement over the carotid artery. The wounds were old enough that the surrounding tissue had begun to necrotize, creating dark halos around each puncture. How long between the disappearance and the discovery of the body? Varies, sometimes hours, sometimes days. Oswald covered the woman's face again, his movements gentle despite his trembling. But they're always found in the same general area within a mile of Ravencrest Manor. The magistrate says it's coincidence, that the killer is trying to implicate the Lord. But I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I've never seen coincidence arrange bodies in perfect circles with their heads pointing toward the same location. Which is? The old cemetery. The one attached to the Ravencrest family crypt. Oswald moved to a small desk in the corner and retrieved a leather folder. I've kept records. Detailed ones. The magistrate told me to stop, said I was seeing patterns that weren't there. But here, look at the map I've made. Isaac studied the paper Oswald unfolded. Someone had marked the location of each body with a red X, and the pattern was unmistakable. The deaths formed a rough spiral, starting at the city's outskirts and gradually moving inward. Each victim had been found closer to the city center than the last. Closer to the manor. It's hunting systematically, Isaac said, more to himself than to Oswald. Starting at the edges, working its way inward, testing boundaries, growing bolder. Or hungrier, Oswald whispered. My grandmother used to tell stories about the old days before the purge. About the noble families who made pacts with dark things, who traded their humanity for power and immortality. Everyone thought they were just tales meant to frighten children. But after seeing these bodies, he trailed off, shaking his head. I don't know what to believe anymore. Isaac carefully folded the map and slipped it into his jacket. Keep making your records. Keep noting the patterns. And don't tell anyone else what you've told me. He left the morgue as the church bells struck 8. The sound somehow more ominous in daylight than it had been the night before. The streets were busier now, filled with merchants and laborers going about their business with the determined normality of people trying to convince themselves that everything was fine. But Isaac saw the fear beneath the routine, the way people avoided certain streets. The crosses that appeared in windows overnight, the garlic hanging in doorways despite the fact that autumn had barely begun. The morning was spent talking to witnesses. A baker whose apprentice had vanished. A widow whose husband's body had been found near the old cemetery. A constable who been first on the scene of 3 separate discoveries and who started carrying a silver knife in addition to his official weapons. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle, another detail that confirmed what Isaac already suspected. Greyholm was being hunted by a vampire, one with both power and protection. By noon, Isaac made his way to the Silver Quill, a small bookshop tucked down a narrow alley in the merchant quarter. The shop's windows were grimy, its sign faded, and it had the look of a place people passed without noticing, which, Isaac suspected, was precisely the point. He entered to the sound of a bell tinkling overhead, and found himself surrounded by towering shelves packed with volumes in various states of decay. Back here, Ilara's voice called from the depths of the shop. Isaac navigated the maze of books until he found her in a small alcove at the rear, sitting at a table covered with open manuscripts and loose papers. She looked up as he approached, and he saw that she hadn't slept. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a hasty knot. So have you? Word travels fast in a city this size. But I suppose subtlety isn't the point anymore, is it? Not when 7 people are dead and more will follow. Isaac sat, his eyes scanning the documents spread across the table. He recognized medieval Latin, religious texts, and what appeared to be family genealogies. Tell me about the Ravencrests. Ilara leaned back, her expression grim. They've ruled Greyholm for nearly 400 years. King to power during the War of Succession, when the old king died without clear heirs. Edmund Ravencrest's ancestor, also named Edmund, provided crucial support to the eventual victor. In return, he received this valley, the title of Lord, and certain protections. What kind of protections? The legal kind. Immunity from searches. Exemption from church investigations. The right to administer justice within his own lands without oversight. Ilara tapped one of the manuscripts. This is from the University Archives, technically restricted, but I made a copy before they locked the relevant sections. It describes the original Edmund Ravencrest as a man of peculiar habits who shunned daylight and kept strange hours. It mentions rumors of devil worship, of pacts with unholy powers. But nothing was ever proven, and the king protected him. Isaac felt a cold certainty settling in his chest. And the current lord? Edmund Ravencrest IV, 53 years old. Widowed 10 years ago when his wife died in childbirth along with a baby, a son. His only surviving child is his daughter, Cassandra, who's 22. Ilara pulled out another document, this one more recent. I spoke with a maid who used to work at the manor. She said Lady Cassandra was perfectly healthy until about 8 months ago. Then she fell ill with some mysterious ailment. Started keeping to her rooms, refusing visitors, avoiding sunlight. Her father became obsessed with curing her, bringing in specialist after specialist. None helped, and the deaths started around the same time. Exactly, Ilara met his eyes. I'm not saying Lord Edmund is the vampire, but I think he knows what his daughter has become, and I think he's protecting her. Isaac considered this, weighing the implications. A vampire protected by nobility would be nearly impossible to confront directly. Any accusation would be dismissed as slander. Any evidence would be suppressed. And if he simply killed Lady Cassandra without proof, without proper process, he'd be nothing more than a murderer himself, and the balance he'd sworn to maintain would be violated. "There's more," Alara said, sliding another paper across the table. "I found records of the original Edmund Ravencrest's death, or rather, I found that there are no records. He simply disappears from historical accounts after 1687. No death certificate, no burial record, nothing. It's as if he just vanished, or never died at all." Alara nodded slowly. "I had the same thought. What if the transformation, whatever it was, has been passed down through the family? What if each generation has produced at least one vampire, and they've been hiding it for centuries? It would explain the family's obsession with privacy, their resistance to outside interference, their power." Isaac stood and moved to the shop's small window, looking out at the street beyond. A group of children ran past, laughing, and for a moment the normalcy of it struck him as obscene. How could life continue when death walked among them? But that was always the way people adapted, rationalized, found ways to live with horror because the alternative was madness. "I need to see the family crypt," he said finally. "The pattern of the bodies suggests the vampire is connected to that location. There might be evidence there, something that would give us leverage. The cemetery is on manor grounds. You'd need permission to enter, and Lord Edmund doesn't grant that permission to outsiders." Alara joined him at the window. "But there's another way. The old catacombs beneath the city connect to the cemetery. They were used during the siege of 1634, when the city held out for 6 months against an invading army. Most of the entrances have been sealed, but I found references to one that might still be accessible through the cellar of the old abbey, on the eastern edge of the city." Isaac turned to look at her. "You've thought about this?" "Of course I have. My brother was one of the first victims. David was 16, apprenticed to a silversmith. He disappeared in March, and they found him 4 days later in the shadow of the manor walls." Her voice was steady, but Isaac could hear the anger beneath it, cold and sharp as a blade. "So yes, I've thought about it, I've researched, I've planned. But I'm a scholar, not a fighter. I can find the path, but I can't walk it alone." "Show me," Isaac said. They left the bookshop separately, Alara first, Isaac following 10 minutes later, and made their way through winding streets to the eastern quarter where the buildings grew older and the prosperity of the merchant district gave way to the shabby gentility of faded glory. The old abbey was a crumbling structure of gray stone, half collapsed and abandoned since the church had built a grander cathedral closer to the city center. Its grounds were overgrown, its gate hanging from one hinge. Alara led Isaac around to the back, where a wooden door sagged in its frame. She produced a key borrowed from the city archives, she said with a thin smile, and let them into the damp darkness of the abbey's interior. Broken pews littered the nave, and birds nested in the rafters. But Alara moved confidently through the wreckage, clearly having been here before, until she reached a door behind what had once been the altar. The stairs beyond descended into absolute darkness. Isaac lit a lantern he'd brought, and by its light they made their way down worn stone steps that seemed to go on forever. The air grew colder, heavier, thick with the smell of earth and old death. Finally, they reached the bottom and found themselves in a narrow tunnel, its walls carved from living rock. "The catacombs extend for miles," Alara said, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "They were originally dug as burial chambers, but during the siege they became escape routes and supply corridors. This passage should lead us north, under the city walls, and eventually to the cemetery." They walked in silence, the lantern casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. Isaac noted the niches carved into the stone, many still holding the remnants of ancient burials, bones turned to dust, rotted wood, the occasional glint of metal from grave goods long forgotten. The tunnel branched and intersected with others, a labyrinth that would be easy to get lost in without a guide. He was grateful for Alara's presence, even as he wondered at her courage. Most scholars would have stayed safely behind their books. But she'd lost a brother, and grief could make people braver than they had any right to be. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the tunnel began to slope upward. Alara stopped, pointing ahead to where a faint square of lesser darkness marked a passage upward. "That should be the cemetery." The entrance is disguised as a monument to stone angel with a hollow base. It was built during the siege as an emergency exit. They emerged into twilight, though Isaac wasn't sure if it was the natural twilight of evening or simply the gloom of the cemetery. Massive trees grew here, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy that blocked most of the sky. Tombstones tilted at drunken angles, their inscriptions worn smooth by centuries of weather. And at the far end of the cemetery, built into the side of a low hill, stood the Ravencrest family crypt, a structure of white marble that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Isaac approached it carefully, all his senses alert for danger. The crypt's entrance was sealed with an iron door bearing the Ravencrest coat of arms, the silver stag, now tarnished to gray. But around the door, the ground was disturbed, the grass trampled. And there were marks in the earth that might have been footprints or might have been something being dragged. "Recent activity," he murmured, crouching to examine the marks more closely. Then he froze. There, in the soft earth, was a perfect handprint, small, delicate, unmistakably feminine. And beside it, drops of something dark that had soaked into the ground. Blood. Alara gasped, and Isaac looked up to see what had startled her. There, standing at the edge of the cemetery, barely visible among the shadows, was a figure in a long white dress. Even in the gloom, Isaac could see that she was beautiful, pale skin, dark hair, and eyes that caught the last of the light and reflected it back like a cat's. She stood perfectly still, watching them with an expression that managed to be both curious and hungry. "Lady Cassandra," Alara whispered. The figure smiled, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. Then she turned and glided away, moving with inhuman grace, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Isaac's hand had gone to his sword, but he knew pursuit would be futile. She'd shown herself deliberately, a message rather than an attack. She knew they were here. She knew what they suspected, and she wanted them to know that she knew. "We need to leave," Isaac said quietly. Now, they retreated to the catacombs, but as they descended back into darkness, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the shadows above. The vampire had revealed herself, which meant the game had changed. She was no longer hiding. She was challenging him. And that meant she was either supremely confident or supremely desperate, and Isaac wasn't sure which possibility worried him more. Isaac spent the night awake, sitting by his window and watching the streets below. Twice he saw the watch hurry past, responding to screams that echoed from distant quarters. Once he thought he glimpsed a pale figure moving across rooftops with impossible speed. But each time he looked directly at it, there was nothing there, just shadows and the tricks the mind played in darkness. By morning, he knew what he had to do. The time for investigation was over. He had enough evidence to confront Lord Ravencrest, though not enough for any official body to act on. But Isaac wasn't bound by the constraints of magistrates and courts. His authority came from a higher source, from Iran himself, from the ancient covenant that demanded balance between life and death. The vampire had to be stopped, and if that meant confronting nobility and their own stronghold, so be it. He dressed carefully, choosing his most formal clothing, a black coat over a white shirt, leather boots polished to a shine. He strapped his sword to his hip openly rather than concealing it, and hung his pendant outside his shirt, where it could be clearly seen. Then he walked through the waking city to Ravencrest Manor, his pace measured and deliberate. The manor gates were guarded by 4 men in the Lord's livery, and they regarded Isaac with suspicion as he approached. "State your business," the captain said, one hand on his sword hilt. "I am Isaac of Thornhaven, hunter of the unnatural and servant of Iran. I require an audience with Lord Edmund Ravencrest regarding a matter of life and death." Isaac kept his voice calm but firm. "Tell him I know about his daughter. Tell him I've seen the bodies. And tell him that I come not as an enemy, but as someone who might offer a solution." The guard's face paled, and for a moment Isaac thought he might refuse entry. But then he nodded to one of his men, who hurried inside. They waited in tense silence for 5 minutes before the messenger returned and whispered something to the captain. The guard's expression shifted from suspicion to something closer to fear. "You're to come immediately. But your weapons stay here." Isaac unbuckled his sword and handed it over, though he kept his pendant and the small vial of blessed water hidden in his coat pocket. Then he followed the guard through the manor gates, across a courtyard of raked gravel, and into the manor itself. The interior was precisely what Isaac expected, wealth displayed in dark wood paneling. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes, portraits of severe-looking ancestors. But beneath the grandeur was a sense of wrongness, of corruption barely concealed. The servants they passed moved with the hunched posture of people living under constant fear. The air smelled faintly of incense and something else, something organic and unpleasant. And the windows, Isaac noted, were all heavily curtained, allowing only the barest slivers of daylight to penetrate. Lord Edmund Ravencrest received him in a study on the second floor, a room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk of carved mahogany. The Lord himself was a tall man, gaunt to the point of emaciation, with gray hair and eyes so deeply shadowed they looked bruised. He wore black from head to toe, and his hands trembled slightly as he dismissed the guard and gestured for Isaac to sit. "You have remarkable boldness coming here," Lord Edmund said, his voice rough as if from disuse. "A remarkable foolishness. I haven't decided which. Neither, my lord. I have necessity." Isaac remained standing. "Your daughter is killing your people. 7 dead in the last month, dozens more over the past 8 months. The pattern is clear, the evidence overwhelming. I know what she is. The question is, what do you intend to do about it?" Lord Edmund's face contorted, and for a moment Isaac thought he might call for the guards. Might have Isaac thrown out or arrested or worse. But then the Lord seemed to collapse inward, all his pride and authority draining away, leaving only a broken father. "You know nothing," he whispered. "Nothing of what we've endured, what sacrifices we've made. Then tell me." The Lord moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of dark liquid, pouring himself a generous measure with shaking hands. He didn't offer any to Isaac. "My family has carried a curse for 400 years. A gift and a curse, depending on your perspective. My ancestor, the first Edmund, made a bargain during the War of Succession. He was dying, you see. Wounded in battle, infection spreading through his blood. He knew he had days at most. And then a woman came to him, beautiful, ancient, powerful. She offered him a choice: die and let his bloodline end, or accept her gift and live forever. He chose immortality. He chose survival," Lord Edmund corrected sharply. "He had a wife, children, responsibilities. He thought he could control it, manage it, and perhaps he could, for a time. But the hunger is constant. The need for blood, for life essence, it grows stronger with each passing year. He learned to take small amounts from many people rather than killing outright. He learned to hunt carefully, to hide. And he passed both the curse and the knowledge down to his heirs." Isaac listened without interrupting, filing away every detail. This was more than he'd expected, not just one vampire, but a legacy of them, each generation inheriting the transformation. "The curse doesn't affect everyone," Lord Edmund continued. "Most of my line are born normal. But there's always one in each generation who carries it, who transforms at maturity. My grandfather was one. My great-aunt, and now," his voice broke, "now Cassandra, my only child. She began changing 8 months ago, just after her 22nd birthday. It started with sensitivity to sunlight, then an aversion to certain foods. And then the hunger came, and you tried to help her control it. I tried everything." Lord Edmund's hand slammed down on the desk, making the bottles jump. "Every technique my family records described, every method of resistance and control. I brought in physicians, hoping they might find some medical explanation, some treatment, but nothing worked. The hunger only grew stronger, and then people started dying. Why didn't you stop her? Lock her away? Seek help from the church, from hunters like myself? Because she's my daughter." The Lord's eyes blazed with desperate fury. "Because I've already lost my wife, my son. Cassandra is all I have left, and because I hoped, I prayed, that she might learn control as my ancestor did, that the deaths would stop once she learned to feed without killing. But instead she's become more reckless, more hungry. It's as if something in her delights in the hunt, in the kill." Isaac felt a cold suspicion forming. "Or as if someone is encouraging her." Lord Edmund went very still. "What do you mean?" "The pattern of deaths is too deliberate. The bodies arranged in circles, all pointing toward your family crypt. Someone is making a statement, performing a ritual. And your daughter, no matter how hungry, no matter how new to this curse, wouldn't instinctively do that. Someone is teaching her, guiding her." Isaac moved closer to the desk, his eyes locked on the Lord's face. "The woman who cursed your ancestor, is she still alive?" Lord Edmund's cup slipped from his fingers, dark liquid spreading across the polished wood. "That's impossible. The records say she disappeared centuries ago, that she moved on to pray elsewhere. What if she didn't? What if she's been here all along, watching your family, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what she created?" Isaac felt the pieces clicking into place, the pattern revealing itself. "What if this isn't about your daughter losing control, it's about someone using her, teaching her to hunt in a specific way for a specific purpose?" The Lord sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking decades older. "The ritual. You're saying someone is using Cassandra to complete some kind of ritual. The bodies form a spiral pattern, moving inward toward the city center, toward this manor. And if the pattern continues, Isaac pulled out the map Oswald had given him, spreading it on the desk. The next victim will be taken from within these walls. Lord Edmund stared at the map, his face draining of what little color it had. My household staff. My guards. Me. He looked up at Isaac, and there was genuine terror in his eyes now. Or is Cassandra herself the final sacrifice? Before Isaac could answer, a scream echoed through the manor high, terrified, abruptly cut short. Both men ran for the door, Isaac retrieving his weapons from the startled guard in the hallway. They followed the sound to the east wing, where servants clustered around an open doorway, none willing to enter. Isaac pushed through them and found himself in what was clearly Lady Cassandra's chambers. The room was decorated in shades of white and pale blue, but the beauty was marred by the destruction. Furniture had been overturned, curtains torn from the windows, and the bed was a tangle of blood-stained sheets. But what drew Isaac's attention was the mirror, a tall standing mirror in the corner. Its surface cracked but still reflecting. And in that reflection, written in what looked like fresh blood, were words in an ancient script. Can you read it? Lord Edmund whispered, staying in the doorway as if afraid to enter his daughter's room. Isaac could. The language was Old Iridian, a tongue used by practitioners of blood magic before the purges. It says, "The circle closes. The daughter returns to the mother. Blood calls to blood, and the covenant shall be renewed in death and rebirth." What does that mean? It means we're too late to prevent the ritual. It's already begun. Isaac turned to face the Lord. Where would your daughter go? Where would she feel safe, drawn to? Lord Edmund's eyes widened. The crypt. Our family crypt. That's where the first Edmund is entombed. That's where the bloodline began. They ran through the manor, the Lord shouting for his guards to follow. But as they crossed the courtyard, Isaac felt it, a subtle shift in the air, a thinning of the barrier between the living world and the realm of death. He'd felt this before, in places where powerful necromancy had been worked, where the natural order had been violated. The ritual was reaching its climax. The cemetery was darker than it had been the previous evening, the shadows seeming to writhe with their own life. Lord Edmund led them directly to the crypt, and Isaac saw that its iron door now stood open, revealing a stairway descending into darkness. The guards hesitated at the threshold, and Isaac couldn't blame them. The wrongness emanating from below was palpable, a pressure that made breathing difficult and thoughts sluggish. Stay here, Isaac commanded. If anything comes up those stairs that isn't me or the Lord, you cut it down. Understood? The captain nodded, his face pale but determined. Isaac descended into the crypt with Lord Edmund close behind, the blessed water in his pocket growing warm, a sign of nearby undead presence. The stairs led to a circular chamber lined with stone sarcophagi, each bearing the name and dates of a Ravencrest ancestor. But the chamber's center was empty, and the floor there had been marked with symbols drawn in blood, a complex pattern of circles and sigils that made Isaac's pendant burn hot against his chest. And in the middle of that pattern knelt Lady Cassandra. She was still beautiful, but now her beauty was terrible skin so pale it seemed to glow, eyes that burned with red light, teeth elongated into fangs. She wore the same white dress from the previous evening, now stained with blood. And standing behind her, one pale hand resting on the girl's shoulder, was the woman from the ancient bargain. She looked perhaps 30, with features that spoke of a dozen different ancestries and none at all. Her dress was black silk that seemed to absorb light, and her smile was the smile of a predator who waited patiently for prey to walk into the trap. Lord Ravencrest, she said, her voice musical and cold. How kind of you to join us. And you've brought a hunter. How delightful. We so rarely get witnesses to moments of true transformation. Release my daughter, Lord Edmund said, his voice shaking but firm. Whatever bargain you made with my ancestor, it ends now. I renounce it. I break it! The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You cannot break what was sealed in blood and death. Your ancestor understood that. He paid the price willingly, his humanity for power, his mortality for eternal life. And now, after 4 centuries, the debt comes due. His bloodline returns to me, and through your daughter, I shall be reborn into greater power than before. Isaac stepped forward, placing himself between the woman and Lord Edmund. Cassandra isn't just your descendant's child. She's a person with her own will. The ritual requires willing sacrifice. Does she give it? For the first time, Lady Cassandra looked up, and Isaac saw confusion in her burning eyes, confusion and fear. I don't understand what's happening to me. The hunger is so strong, but I don't want this. I don't want to kill. You see? Isaac kept his voice calm, focused on the girl rather than the ancient vampire behind her. She doesn't consent. The ritual is flawed. It cannot be completed. The woman's smile faded, replaced by cold fury. The girl's conscious mind is irrelevant. Her blood recognizes its source. Her power calls to mine. She will be consumed, and I shall rise renewed, freed from the limitations of this mortal shell to become something greater, pure hunger, pure power, unbound by flesh. Isaac's hand moved to his pendant, and he began to pray, not aloud, but silently, calling on Iran to witness this violation of the boundary between life and death. The pendant grew hotter, brighter, and the symbols on the floor began to smoke and fade. The ancient vampire hissed, her form flickering like a candle flame. "You cannot stop this," she snarled. "I am beyond your god's reach. I am older than his worship, older than the cities of men. But not older than death itself," Isaac replied, "and not more powerful than a father's love." He looked at Lord Edmund, and in that moment, understanding passed between them. The Lord knew what Isaac was asking. He knew the price. Lord Edmund stepped forward, moving past Isaac to kneel beside his daughter. "Cassandra," he said softly, "look at me, sweetheart. Do you know who I am?" The girl's burning eyes focused on her father, and for a moment, the red light dimmed. "Papa, I'm here. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from this. But I can protect you now." He took her hand, and Isaac saw that the Lord's palm was cut, bleeding freely. "The curse came through my bloodline. Let it end with my bloodline. Take what you need from me. Drink and be free." "No!" The ancient vampire lunged forward, but Isaac was ready. He threw the vial of blessed water directly at her, and where it struck her skin, she screamed a sound that made the walls shake and dust rain from the ceiling. She stumbled back, smoke rising from the burns. Lady Cassandra looked at her father's bleeding hand, then at the monster behind her, and Isaac saw the moment of choice, the instant where her humanity wrestled with the hunger and won. She turned away from the ancient vampire and lowered her mouth to her father's palm, drinking carefully, gently, taking only what she needed. The effect was immediate. The blood symbols on the floor cracked and faded. The oppressive weight of dark magic lifted. And Lord Edmund, his face peaceful despite the growing pallor, smiled at his daughter. "That's my girl," he whispered. "That's my brave girl." The ancient vampire shrieked in rage and frustration, her form becoming less substantial, more shadow than flesh. "You've ruined it! Ruined centuries of preparation. The girl was mine by right of blood." "The girl belongs to herself," Isaac said, advancing with his sword drawn, a blade of silver he'd been keeping in reserve. "And you belong to the realm of the dead. It's past time you returned there." He didn't give her a chance to respond. The sword pierced through her chest, and this time, with the ritual broken and her power fractured, the silver did its work. She dissolved into smoke and ash, her final scream echoing in the chamber before fading to nothing. The curse that had bound the Ravencrest family for 400 years died with her. Isaac turned to find Lady Cassandra cradling her father's head, tears streaming down her face. Lord Edmund was still breathing, but barely. He'd given too much, knowing exactly what it would cost. But his eyes were clear and peaceful as he looked up at his daughter. "You're free now," he whispered. "Free of the curse, free of the hunger. Live, Cassandra. Live the life I couldn't give you." "Papa, no. Please don't leave me. Never," the Lord said softly. "I'll be with your mother and brother now." "But you—" He reached up with his free hand to touch her cheek. "You get to stay. You get to have the life we dreamed of for you. Promise me you'll live it well." "I promise," Cassandra sobbed. "I promise, Papa." Lord Edmund smiled one final time, then closed his eyes. The hand on his daughter's cheek fell away, and he was gone. Isaac stood silently, giving the girl her moment of grief. Then, gently, he helped her to her feet. "Come," he said. "Let's get you out of here." They emerged from the crypt to find dawn breaking over Greyholm, the sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The guards stared in shock at Lady Cassandra at her changed appearance, but the captain simply bowed his head in respect. News of the Lord's sacrifice would spread, Isaac knew. And with it, the truth about the curse that had plagued the family for generations. What happens now? Cassandra asked, her voice small and lost. Now you live, Isaac said. The curse is broken. You're no longer bound by the hunger, no longer transforming. You're simply yourself changed, yes, but free. And the people I killed? That was the curse, the ancient vampire's influence, not you. Isaac looked at her seriously. But you'll carry the weight of those deaths regardless. Use it. Let it make you better, wiser, more compassionate. Your father died to give you a second chance. Don't waste it. Cassandra nodded slowly and looked up at the rising sun. For a moment, Isaac tensed, afraid the light would harm her. But she only smiled a small, sad smile as the warmth touched her face without burning. I can feel it, she whispered. The sun. I'd forgotten how beautiful it was. Isaac left Greyholm 3 days later after Lord Edmund's funeral, and after ensuring that Lady Cassandra had the support she needed from both the city's leaders and from Ilara, who'd agreed to stay on as advisor and friend. The deaths had stopped. The fear that had gripped the city was lifting slowly but surely. The balance had been restored. As he walked the forest road away from the city, Isaac touched his pendant and thought of Iran, of the god who understood that death, while inevitable, should come in its proper time and place. Lord Edmund's death had been a choice, a sacrifice made out of love, and that made all the difference. That was the kind of death that honored both the living and the dead. The bodies arranged in circles, a spiral pattern, the ancient vampire's ritual. It had all been leading to this moment, not the monster's triumph, but a father's love proving stronger than any curse. Isaac had seen much darkness in his years as a hunter, but he'd also seen moments of grace, of courage, of humanity asserting itself against impossible odds. He would carry this story with him, adding it to his collection of memories and lessons. And the next time he answered a desperate letter, the next time he walked into a city plagued by the supernatural, he would remember that even in the deepest darkness, even under the blood beneath the crest, there was still room for hope. The road stretched ahead, and Isaac walked it with steady purpose, ready for whatever came next. Because the balance between life and death was never static. It required constant vigilance, constant work. And as long as he drew breath, he would continue that work. It was, after all, what he'd been called to do. 6 months passed before Isaac returned to Greyholm. He hadn't planned to, his work took him where he was needed, and there were always new threats, new imbalances to address. But a letter arrived at an inn in the coastal city of Salthaven, forwarded through a network of contacts he'd cultivated over the years. The handwriting was unfamiliar but elegant, and the message brief. Please come. There are things you should know. He arrived on an afternoon in late spring, when the valley was green and alive with birdsong. The city looked different than he remembered, lighter somehow, as if a shadow had lifted. People moved through the streets with genuine ease rather than fearful urgency. Children played in the squares without parents hovering anxiously nearby. The Singing Crow's common room was full of laughter rather than whispered dread. Martha Wicklow greeted him with tears in her eyes and a fierce embrace that surprised them both. You came back, she said. I wasn't sure you would. I was invited, Isaac replied, smiling slightly. How could I refuse? She's done remarkable things, Lady Cassandra. The city loves her. Martha poured him ale without asking. After Lord Edmund's death and the truth came out about the curse, there were some who wanted her gone. Feared her, for what she was. But she stayed, faced them all down with such courage. And she's proven herself time and again, fair leadership, generous aid to those in need. She opened the manor's stores during the hard winter, funded a new hospital, listens to the common folk like her father never did. Isaac sipped his ale, pleased but not surprised. He'd seen the steel in Cassandra during that terrible night in the crypt, the strength that came from facing the worst of yourself and choosing to be better. I'm glad to hear it. She's waiting for you at the manor. Send word this morning that when you arrived, you were to be brought directly. Martha hesitated, then added, She's not alone. There's been changes. Good ones, mostly. But you should see for yourself. The manor gates stood open when Isaac arrived. No guards challenging his approach. The courtyard was filled with activity servants going about their duties, without the hunched fear he'd seen on his first visit. The oppressive atmosphere had vanished, replaced by something approaching normalcy. A young man in scholar's robes directed him inside, and Isaac recognized Ilara's influence in the organization of the household. Lady Cassandra received him in the same study where he'd confronted her father. But the room had been transformed, curtains pulled back to let in the afternoon sun, fresh flowers on the desk, books organized rather than scattered. And Cassandra herself looked entirely different from the terrified, transformed girl he'd last seen. She wore a simple dress of deep blue, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her skin was still pale but had lost its supernatural glow, and her eyes, while sharp and intelligent, no longer burned with red light. "Isaac," she said, rising to greet him. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would. Your letter intrigued me." He accepted the chair she offered, noting the way she moved with careful deliberation, as if still adjusting to her changed body. "Martha tells me you've done well. I've tried." Cassandra poured tea with steady hands. "It hasn't been easy. There are still people who fear me, who see me as a monster rather than a victim of circumstance. But I'm learning that leadership means showing up every day, proving yourself through actions rather than words." She handed him a cup, then sat across from him. "I wanted you to know what happened after you left, to understand the full consequences of that night. Tell me." Cassandra took a breath, organizing her thoughts. "The curse is gone completely and truly gone. I've had healers examine me, scholars study me, even a priest perform an exorcism just to be absolutely certain. I'm no longer transforming, no longer driven by hunger for blood. But I'm not entirely human either." Isaac set down his cup. "Explain." "I'm stronger than I should be. Faster. My senses are sharper. I can hear conversations from across the manor, smell rain coming hours before it arrives. I need less sleep, less food. And I heal quickly from injuries that would cripple others." She met his eyes steadily. "The physical changes the curse caused didn't fully revert. I'm something in between, no longer vampire, but no longer entirely mortal either. How do you feel about that?" Cassandra smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "At first I was terrified. I thought it meant the curse wasn't really broken, that I'd eventually revert to what I was becoming. But as the months passed and the hunger never returned, I realized something. These changes aren't a curse. They're a gift, my father's gift. His blood, given freely in love, changed the nature of the transformation. It made me something new." Isaac considered this, turning it over in his mind. It made a certain sense Lord Edmund had carried the bloodline curse but had never fully transformed. His blood, freely given to save his daughter, had contained both the curse's power and his own human will to resist it. The combination had created something unprecedented. A being with a vampire's physical advantages, but none of the hunger, none of the darkness. "You're being careful with these abilities?" he asked. "Very careful. I use them to help rather than harm. When there was a fire in the merchant quarter, I was able to enter burning buildings and carry people out. The smoke didn't affect me the way it should. When bandits attacked a supply caravan, I helped the watch track them down. I can do things others can't, and I've chosen to use that for good." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But I wanted you to know, wanted the first person who truly saw what I was to understand what I've become. Because if someday I do start to change, if the curse does reassert itself, you'll need to come back and stop me." Isaac studied her face, seeing the determination there, the absolute commitment to remaining who she'd chosen to be. "I don't think that will be necessary, but if it ever is, I'll come." "You have my word." Relief washed over Cassandra's features. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She stood and moved to the window, looking out over the city. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. About the night my father died. About what he said to me in those final moments." Isaac waited, letting her gather her thoughts. "He told me that every generation of our family had produced one person who transformed. But he said there were also those who'd resisted, who'd fought the curse from within. My great-great-aunt Margaret," he said, "had carried the bloodline, but had spent her entire life studying the curse, looking for ways to break it. She'd died old and human, never transforming, because she'd found a way to suppress the change through meditation and will." Cassandra turned to face Isaac. "My father believed the curse could only be truly broken through sacrifice. Someone with the bloodline choosing love over power, choosing death over eternal life. And he was right. He was a braver man than most," Isaac said quietly. "He was a man who made mistakes and then tried to fix them. That's all any of us can do, isn't it?" Cassandra returned to her seat. "I've been thinking about that a lot. About legacy and choice, and the weight we carry from our ancestors. The Ravencrests did terrible things over the centuries. People died because of our curse, because of choices made 400 years ago. I can't change that. But I can choose what kind of ancestor I'll be to future generations. And what have you chosen? To break the cycle. to use what I've been given, power, privilege, these strange new abilities to help rather than harm. To make Greyholm a place where people are protected, where the vulnerable are cared for, where justice is blind to wealth and status. She smiled again, this time with a hint of self-mockery. Ambitious, I know. Probably impossible. But I have to try. Not impossible, Isaac said. Difficult, certainly. But you've already survived the impossible. This should be easy by comparison. They talked for another hour about the city's recovery, about the new hospital being built, about Ilara's work establishing a public library. Cassandra showed him the records she'd compiled of every person who died because of the curse. A ledger she kept in her father's desk and reviewed every night. I won't let them be forgotten, she said. Their names, their lives, they matter. They'll always matter. As the sun began to set, Isaac prepared to leave. But Cassandra stopped him at the door. There's one more thing. I've been having dreams lately. Visions, maybe. Of a woman who looks like the one you destroyed in the crypt. But different, younger, less corrupted. She speaks to me, tells me things about the ancient world, about powers that existed before the gods we worship now. She says she's not the vampire you killed, but something older. Something that was there at the beginning. Isaac felt a cold touch of warning. What does she want? Knowledge, she says. Exchange of information. She claims she can teach me to fully control my abilities, to understand what I've become. But she wants something in return, access to my bloodline's memories. The knowledge we've accumulated over centuries. Cassandra met his eyes. I haven't responded. Haven't agreed to anything, but I wanted you to know. In case it means something. In case there's a new threat emerging. Isaac's hand moved unconsciously to his pendant. This was concerning entities that claimed to predate the gods were rarely benign, and any creature interested in bloodline memories and ancient knowledge was potentially dangerous. But it was also something that might not manifest for years, if at all. For now, Cassandra seemed stable, in control, and aware of the danger. If she appears again, don't engage. Send for me immediately. Isaac pulled out a small leather pouch and handed it to her. This contains blessed salt and a calling stone. If you're ever in danger, any kind of danger, crush the stone and I'll know. I'll come as quickly as I can. Cassandra accepted the pouch with visible gratitude. Thank you. For everything you've done. For seeing me as a person rather than a monster. For giving me the chance to choose. You did the choosing, Isaac reminded her. I just helped clear the path. He left the manor as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Greyholm's streets were quiet but not fearful. A kind of peaceful evening that suggested a city at ease with itself. Isaac allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was what he worked for, not just the destruction of threats, but the restoration of balance.
She looked up as he approached, and he saw that she hadn't slept. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a hasty knot. You've been busy, he observed. So have you. Word travels fast in a city this size. The mortician, the baker, the widow, you're not exactly being subtle. She gestured to a chair across from her. But I suppose subtlety isn't the point anymore, is it? Not when 7 people are dead and more will follow. Isaac sat, his eyes scanning the documents spread across the table. He recognized medieval Latin religious texts and what appeared to be family genealogies. Tell me about the Ravencrests. Ilara leaned back, her expression grim. They've ruled Greyholm for nearly 400 years. Came to power during the War of Succession, when the old king died without clear heirs. Edmund Ravencrest's ancestor, also named Edmund, provided crucial support to the eventual victor. In return, he received this valley, the title of Lord, and certain protections. What kind of protections? The legal kind. Immunity from searches. Exemption from church investigations. The right to administer justice within his own lands without oversight. Ilara tapped one of the manuscripts. This is from the university archives, technically restricted, but I made a copy before they locked the relevant sections. It describes the original Edmund Ravencrest as a man of peculiar habits who shunned daylight and kept strange hours. It mentions rumors of devil worship, of pacts with unholy powers, but nothing was ever proven, and the king protected him. Isaac felt a cold certainty settling in his chest, and the current Lord, Edmund Ravencrest, for 53 years old, widowed 10 years ago when his wife died in childbirth along with the baby, a son. His only surviving child is his daughter, Cassandra, who's 22. Elara pulled out another document, this one more recent. I spoke with a maid who used to work at the manor. She said Lady Cassandra was perfectly healthy until about 8 months ago. Then she fell ill with some mysterious ailment. Started keeping to her rooms, refusing visitors, avoiding sunlight. Her father became obsessed with curing her, bringing in specialist after specialist. None helped, and the deaths started around the same time. Exactly, Elara met his eyes. I'm not saying Lord Edmund is the vampire, but I think he knows what his daughter has become, and I think he's protecting her. Isaac considered this, weighing the implications. A vampire protected by nobility would be nearly impossible to confront directly. Any accusation would be dismissed as slander. Any evidence would be suppressed. And if he simply killed Lady Cassandra without proof, without proper process, he'd be nothing more than a murderer himself, and the balance he'd sworn to maintain would be violated. There's more, Elara said, sliding another paper across the table. I found records of the original Edmund Ravencrest's death, or rather, I found that there are no records. He simply disappears from historical accounts after 1687. No death certificate, no burial record, nothing. It's as if he just vanished, or never died at all. Elara nodded slowly. I had the same thought. What if the transformation, whatever it was, has been passed down through the family? What if each generation has produced at least one vampire and they've been hiding it for centuries? It would explain the family's obsession with privacy, their resistance to outside interference, their power. Isaac stood and moved to the shop's small window, looking out at the street beyond. A group of children ran past, laughing, and for a moment the normalcy of it struck him as obscene. How could life continue when death walked among them? But that was always the way people adapted, rationalized, found ways to live with horror because the alternative was madness. I need to see the family crypt, he said finally. The pattern of the bodies suggests the vampire is connected to that location. There might be evidence there, something that would give us leverage. The cemetery is on manor grounds. You'd need permission to enter, and Lord Edmund doesn't grant that permission to outsiders. Elara joined him at the window. But there's another way. The old catacombs beneath the city connect to the cemetery. They were used during the siege of 1634, when the city held out for 6 months against an invading army. Most of the entrances have been sealed, but I found references to one that might still be accessible through the cellar of the old abbey. On the eastern edge of the city, Isaac turned to look at her. You've thought about this? Of course I have. My brother was one of the first victims. David was 16, apprenticed to a silversmith. He disappeared in March, and they found him 4 days later in the shadow of the manor walls. Her voice was steady, but Isaac could hear the anger beneath it, cold and sharp as a blade. So yes, I've thought about it. I've researched, I've planned. But I'm a scholar, not a fighter. I can find the path, but I can't walk it alone. Show me, Isaac said. They left the bookshop separately. Lara, first Isaac it, following 10 minutes later, made their way through winding streets to the Place Eastern Quarter, where the buildings grew older and the prosperity of the merchant district gave way to the shabby gentility of faded glory. The old abbey was a crumbling structure of grey stone, half collapsed and abandoned since the church had built a grander cathedral closer to the city centre. Its grounds were overgrown, its gate hanging from one hinge. Elara led Isaac around to the back, where a wooden door sagged in its frame. She produced a key, borrowed from the city archives. She said with a thin smile and let them into the damp darkness of the abbey's interior. Broken pews littered the nave and birds nested in the rafters.
And so, another chapter of our saga concludes, but the tapestry of time still holds many plots to be unveiled. To not miss the unfolding of upcoming events and continue the journey with us, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Leave your like so more listeners discover our tales, and share this story with those who also yearn for new legends. What was your favorite moment from this narrative? Leave your comment below and prepare for the next chapter that will soon echo here.